Today you'll learn 2 easy ways to place a logo onto a t-shirt in Photoshop, with the first method being for those in a rush and the second method being for those who want the most realistic result possible. This one is a ton of fun to try, so I'll leave some optional images below this video for you to test out these techniques for yourself. And if you get overwhelmed at all along the way, be sure to download the free PDF cheat sheet available for this lesson in the description below, so you'll always have a quick overview of the process to look back on in the future. So with that, let's get into Photoshop. So for the first example, you of course need to first import your images into Photoshop. Here I have my logo and then my t-shirt image in 2 separate projects. You can access your images just by going to File, Open, finding them on your computer, and then you'll have exactly what I have here. Now to begin, in my logo project, I'm going to first convert this image to a smart object so that I can scale it without the worry of losing quality. I can do that by right-clicking on that layer and just going to Convert to Smart Object. With that little icon added to the layer, I now know it's a smart object and I can move it into the next project. Grabbing the Move tool by pressing V, I'll click and drag this image up and over to the t-shirt project and drop it into place like so. Now making sure that I have the Show Transform controls enabled up here in the options bar, I'll be able to click and drag out on this transform box to scale up this graphic and place it in the general position as well as the general size that I want for this t-shirt design. Now, since this example is going to be nice and easy, we're doing the rushed example first, I'm just going to place it right about here for now. But as you see, the logo is flat, but our subject's t-shirt is kind of angled. So we need to make our logo fit the angle of our subject. To do that, all we have to do is hold Command or Control on our keyboard and then click on an anchor point in any corner of our transform box. So while holding Command or Control, I'll click on that anchor point and move it back like this. And as you see, it basically just changes the angle of that graphic so it looks like it's sitting against a different angle, or it's going to match the angle of the subject's shirt. So I'll hold Command or Control, click and drag over this way a bit as well. And I'll do this on all corners until I'm happy with the angle of this logo. Now with this complete, I'll click Done in the contextual taskbar, or I can press the check mark in the upper options bar. Now with this complete, of course, it just looks like we have a logo on top of a shirt, which is what we'd have. But to blend these things together really easily, we can use a layer blending mode. So with the logo layer selected, we can just go to the layer blending mode and change it to either screen, or we can set it to color dodge. The results that you get will vary depending on the color of the shirt that you're trying to blend the logo into. In this case, we obviously have a dark colored shirt, so screen or color dodge is going to work the best. However, if you had a lighter colored shirt, I'd recommend that you use the multiply blending mode instead. In this particular project, it doesn't work very well. I find that screen looks best for me here, so I'll click on that one and that is good to go. Zooming into the photo, you can now see that we have a little bit of texture revealing through our graphic, and it just makes things look at least a little bit blended. But of course, this could be done a little bit better, but if you're in a rush, this will get you by. So that method was quick and easy, but doesn't give you the most realistic result. If that was good enough for you, great, I guess I'll just see you later. But for those wanting something a bit more convincing, the second technique gets you a way better result, as you'll see in a moment. So if you are sticking around for this second technique, make sure to let me know by hitting the like button below. This time for option number 2, we're going to have to apply a few more steps along the way to really ensure that this graphic blends nicely into all the folds of the t-shirt and not just the texture. So starting where I left off previously, but now with the logo layer blending mode set to normal, I have already changed the angle of this logo using the Command or Control key on any of the corner anchor points here. So the first step that we're going to do before we do any blending is we're going to basically warp or liquefy this logo to make it look like it's folding around the different bends in the shirt. Now, making sure that that logo layer is in fact a smart object as we did previously, we can now go and apply the Liquify filter by first selecting the logo layer and then going up to Filter and down here to Liquify. This will open up the Liquify workspace, and we'll first go to our Properties menu, scroll all the way to the bottom, and we want to go to the Show Backdrop here. Making sure that this is enabled, we can have this set to Use All Layers, or you can choose the specific background that you're trying to blend things in with. In this case, I want to have the background layer selected, which is the t-shirt. With the mode set to behind, meaning that background layer is going to be behind our logo layer, I can now go to the opacity setting here, and to help make it easy to see where all of those folds are, I'm going to lower the opacity, so that way when we zoom into the photo, we can see exactly what we're working with, and it will make it very easy to liquefy this logo. So now with all of this looking good to go, make sure that preview is enabled down here, and we'll go up to the forward warp tool, which is this icon right here in the top corner. Now, just like the brush tool, we can scale this up or down using the bracket keys, and you'll want to use a slightly larger brush than you might expect. But the first thing that I'm going to do is warp some of the text down here. So I'll just click right along the area that I want to warp, and I'll just click and drag it inwards like so. I'm going to do this in a few different areas across all the letters to basically make it fit and look like it's folding or bending with the t-shirt. So it's going to depend on your project and your shirt that you're blending things in with, but you're just going to repeat this process for all of the different folds in your shirt. The more you fine tune this, the more realistic it's going to look, but I'll leave this one up to you. Again, I'm just clicking and dragging to bend things into place and liquefy them to appear like they're bending around the folds in the shirt. I'm just going to skip ahead until I'm done warping these letters because it is pretty straightforward. You just click and drag. There is no right or wrong. Just experiment with it and you'll figure it out. Now with the letters liquefied, we're going to do the same thing to the logo. And generally, I find doing this on logos or larger graphics a little bit easier because you're dealing with larger areas at once. So to begin, I'll start over here by the foot where there's a very clear big fold in the shirt. So I'm just going to click and move this over, warp that foot in to make it look like it's bending around the edge of the shirt. I'll do the same thing with these leaves, bending those in, warping them, and just making things look like it's bending around the shirt. We'll continue to do this in a bunch of different areas. You can use the bracket keys, just like I mentioned before, to scale your brush up or down and help make the results a little bit more refined. So now after making those liquefy adjustments on both the graphic as well as the text in this particular example, I'll go ahead and click OK. This will now save those changes and bring it back into my original project, this time as a liquefy filter beneath the smart filters. This is available because our logo layer is a smart object. If I turn this liquefy filter off by clicking the eyeball icon, you can see how big of a difference that makes to help blend in this logo with the folds of our shirt. With our liquefy adjustment complete, we now need to make this logo look a little bit less sharp so that it realistically blends into the photo. To do that, all we need to do is apply a Gaussian blur. With the logo layer selected, I'll go up to Filter, and then down here to Blur, and then Gaussian blur. Zooming into the logo so I can get a better view here, we just want to add a very slight blur so that it naturally blends in with the softness of the shirt there. So we don't want to go too crazy, but just a small amount like this looks good enough for me. Right around 0.8 pixels in this particular case. I'll click OK. Now with this complete, we have liquefied our logo and we've also added a slight blur. So that means we're now ready to blend the colors and textures of our shirt and the logo together. To do that, we're going to use two separate layers and the help of our channels. So to begin, I'm going to first double click on the name of this layer and call it to multiply. You'll see why in just a moment. Next, I'll click on the eyeball icon of this multiply layer to hide that logo. Next, we're going to go to the Channels tab, and if you don't see this tab, just go up to Window, and then down here to Channels to reveal it. What we need to do here is basically create a selection of the highlights, midtones, and shadows in our photo. That sounds really complicated, but it's super easy. All you have to do is hold Command or Control and hover over the RGB channel thumbnail. So holding Command or Control and then clicking on that thumbnail here, this will activate a selection of the exposure ranges in your photo. Going back to the Layers tab here, I'll enable my multiply layer, which is the logo in this case. And with this active selection, I'm going to click on the layer mask icon while that logo layer is active. So now that selection will help define the visibility of our logo. Now you'll notice that our logo is suddenly a lot less visible, and the reason for that is because of this layer mask. If I hold Alt or Option and click on this layer mask thumbnail to view it, you can see that our image is now black and white. And in the world of layer masks, white is 100% visible, black is 100% transparent, and any shade of gray in between will represent varying levels of transparency. So because we have these dark gray tones along the t-shirt, that means that it's slightly invisible, and therefore our logo is going to look a lot more faded. However, we want our logo to be more visible, so we're going to invert this layer mask by pressing Command or Control I to invert that mask. Now our logo is still getting blended in slightly. You can see how there's some texture showing through, but it's not totally perfect. So we're going to use the multiply blending mode, which is why this layer was called multiply. So with this layer selected, I'll go up to my layer blending mode and change it down here to multiply. What this does is removes any white areas in our photo and only leaves behind the darker tones in the image. Now to reveal back those missing areas that we've just removed with the multiply blending mode, we need to duplicate this layer and change the blending mode to screen. So with the multiply layer selected, I'll press Command or Control J to duplicate that layer. I'll double click on the name and I'll call this to screen. With this screen layer selected, we'll change the layer blending mode from multiply down here to screen, which will now reveal the white areas back into the image. But because we want this to only be visible in the darker tones of the photo, I'm going to click on the layer mask and press Command or Control I to invert it. And what this will do is now retain all of those white areas in our logo, but just blend them in a lot nicer into our image because we have the layer mask to help define how our white areas of this graphic is blending into the shirt. Now, of course, this looks a little bit too faded, so we can refine this by using some contrast directly on these layer masks. So to add that contrast, we're going to click on that layer mask of the screen layer here and press Command or Control M. Pressing Command or Control M will bring up the curves dialog box, which will allow us to edit the contrast of the layer mask and not the contrast of our actual graphic. And because the layer masks are controlling the visibility of this graphic, by adding contrast, we're also going to be changing the visibility as well. So clicking on the highlights point here, if I drag this over, you'll notice how the white areas suddenly become more and more visible because we're making that layer mask gradually more and more visible. As you can see, we have a bunch of white here now on the mask, aka visibility. Bringing down the highlights like so, you can see that there's now more black and dark tones in the layer mask, and therefore there is less white areas visible from our logo. So we want to find a happy medium here. I'm going to move this up to around this point where the text is starting to get a little bit too bright, so that looks good enough for me here. You can play around with the shadows point as well if needed, but in this case that doesn't serve my logo. So with this complete, I'll click OK, and now that is applied to our screen layer mask. We're going to do the same thing now on the multiply layer mask. Clicking on the multiply layer mask, making sure that white box is around that mask, I'll press Command or Control M to access the curves dialog box. And once again, I'll click on the highlights point here, click and drag this over, and as you can see, all the darker areas of the logo will gradually become more and more rich the further over you drag that highlight slider. So this is kind of up to you how you want to blend in the logo. I'm just going to increase this a little bit to make those dark outlines just pop a bit more. I'll now click OK. In this particular case, I would love to see the logo just a little bit more vibrant and less faded. And to do that, we don't have to do much extra work. We can just duplicate the layers that we already have. I'll begin by duplicating the multiply layer first. So with the multiply layer selected, I'll press Command or Control J to duplicate it, and this will just add a little bit more contrast into the overall logo. This feels a little bit too intense for me, so with that duplicated multiply layer, I'll go to the layer opacity and just drag this down a little bit to refine how intense that result looks. Next, we're going to do the same thing now with the screen layer. Clicking on the screen layer, I'll press Command or Control J to duplicate it, and now you can see that our logo is starting to pop a lot more on this shirt. I'll press Command or Control J one more time to further duplicate that screen layer, and things are looking a lot better to me. In this case, some of the upper areas of the logo are a little bit too bright, so I'll click on the opacity slider with that second screen duplicated layer selected. I'm going to click and drag that opacity down just to refine it a little bit like so. The next thing thing that I'll do is click on the layer mask, grab my brush tool, make sure that my foreground color is set to black, and using a soft round brush here, I'm just going to go and paint over those really bright areas of the text so that they are not going to be as highlighted anymore, and that looks a bit better for me there. I'll then change my foreground color to white, still with that second screen layer mask selected. I'll go up to my brush opacity, drag this down to about 20%, and now I'm going to add back some life to these other letters here that just look a little bit too faded. Because we're adding white onto this layer mask, that means that we're adding a visibility into these letters, but because we have that lower opacity, it just blends in a little bit nicer and looks more realistic. So now with that complete, zooming out, you can see that our logo has now been successfully blended into this image. And if you have any issues with the color for whatever reason, you can just use a hue saturation adjustment layer to refine your logo directly. To give you a quick example of this, just hold Command or Control and click on the thumbnail of any of your logo layers. Holding Command or Control while clicking on that thumbnail will create a selection of your logo, and then you can go to the Adjustments panel, find the hue saturation adjustment like so, click on that, and it will automatically apply that selection onto the layer mask, and therefore you can now adjust the saturation or the hue of your logo without affecting how it's blended at all. Instead, you're just affecting the colors to refine the end result. Once all of that is complete, you can click on your topmost layer, scroll to the bottom of your layer stack, hold the Shift key to select all of the layers in between, and then we'll press Command or Control G to group them like so, and I'll call this to logo. So now turning this on and off, you can see how we have added this realistic logo onto our shirt. Now obviously this took a lot more steps than the first example, but I think it's definitely worthwhile if you want the most realistic and professional result possible with this type of effect. So now you know two great ways to place a logo onto a t-shirt in Photoshop, and to help make remembering all of these steps easy, be sure to download the free lesson cheat sheet below this video. Just click the link in the description, type in your name and email, click the button, and the cheat sheet will instantly be sent to your inbox. By subscribing, you'll also be added to the list of people waiting to receive all my future lesson cheat sheets, so you'll only have to do this process once and then you're good to go. Again, that cheat sheet is available in the description below, and it's totally free. Now, if you're looking for more ways to blend images together in Photoshop, be sure to check out this next video right here on how to blend anything in Photoshop using something called displacement maps and blend if. It's a great way to expand on what you learned here, and I hope to see you over there next.